Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Today I want to take a look at some old Athearn locomotives and see if we can get these running, because this one here, it's been in storage 25, maybe 30 years. I can't remember the last time that I actually tried operating this locomotive. So what I want to do is let's put it on the track, and I've got several of them here. And we'll take and put them on test track and see which ones run, which ones don't, and then we'll start pulling them apart and see if we can fix them and get them operating just like they did when they were new 30 years ago. So let's get started. Okay, before we get started, I want to ask you to take a second to subscribe. Click on the subscribe box, and when that comes up, click on the little bell right next to it and click all. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And first though, let me point out, why did I pick this particular locomotive? These have been in almost constant production by Athearn since about 1955 when they first came out. And over the years, they did, upgrade the mechanism a bit, and with new motors and drives and all kinds of things like that. But it's basically the same locomotive, and they've turned out millions of these over the last 60 years or so. So there's a very good chance that if you or your father or your grandfather has been into trains for any amount of time, that there's one of these in your collection, and it could use resurrecting. Now, in addition to that, all of the locomotives that Athearn produced during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on used basically the same drive mechanism. So what I'm going to show you today with respect to how to get this locomotive operating again, and others like it, will hold true for all of the stuff that was produced in the Athearn line, except for the Genesis locomotives, which really came on since 2000. In addition to the Athearn locomotives, though, a lot of other companies used Athearn locomotives in their train sets, and they were produced for them and custom decorated for gifts and giveaways and things of that nature. And also other companies somewhat copied this. If you take a look at a lifelike Proto 2000 locomotive produced in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they are so close to these that, or the mechanisms are so similar, that they're interchangeable. Okay, you can take parts from an Athearn and use it on an old lifelike locomotive. They're so similar. And also other companies' locomotives use similar designs. So what I'm going to show you today can be used on just about any of the diesel locomotives produced, since the 1950s, one way or another. If they've been in storage a while, there are similar things that can happen, and I'm going to give you an idea of how you can go about diagnosing the problems and actually fixing them. So let's go ahead. I've got several of these F7s down here on the workbench, and let's give them a test first and see which ones run and which ones don't. And then after that, I'll pull it apart and we'll take a look at getting it running again. Okay, so I suspect that some of these are going to work and some of them aren't. So let me hold it and I'll crank up the power here and we'll see if the motor runs. Okay, so it's turning over and it will take off. So that one has survived in good shape. So let me switch to another one. Okay, let's check this one out. Okay, that one's running. Slowly, but it's working. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll test the last one in the bunch. Okay. As you can hear, there's that motor hum, but there's no movement. So there's something going on with this particular locomotive. So let me pull it apart and we'll see what's going on. Okay, let's go ahead and pop off the shell because it's a fairly straightforward procedure to do that. If you notice right here on the side skirts, there is a little slot here, and that has a little nub cast in here on the chassis that interlocks with it. So all you have to do to get these off is put your fingernails underneath of that side skirt like this, pull out, and the shell will just slide right off. Okay, revealing the mechanism. Now, as you can see, I'm going to get this track out of the way since we're not going to need it for a little while. Now, these have a sizable weight here, so that can be just lifted right off. And that gives them a lot of adhesion, a lot of pulling power. Now let's take a look at some of the other things to be aware of here. Okay, if we look at this locomotive, you can see we have the motor here. Now this is what's called the Athearn flat can. This is what they were using back around 1990 and that time period. It's not the most efficient motor out there. It probably pulled in somewhere around 1 amp to 1.5 amps. So that's something you have to be aware of. If you have an older power pack, it might not be powerful enough to run these all the time, or run more than one of them at a time. And also, if you decide to convert to DCC, you'll want to replace this motor with a more efficient one. And that's something I want you to think about, because if you have one of these older ones and they pull a lot of power, and maybe the motor might even be burned out, you can still get replacement parts from Athearn and from Athearn dealers. So you can check around and see if you can't replace the motor. Particularly if you really are attached and have some emotional attachment to, say, the shell, you can actually purchase these chassis. They're still being made, and they still have that same mounting system. So you can probably purchase these off of eBay. You can probably get these off of from hobby shops and the like. And that would allow you to basically swap out the chassis and have one that's a much more efficient operating locomotive. But let's go ahead and see what we can do about getting this one to operate again, since it won't. Now, there are 3 basic things that can go wrong. First of all, right here you have the bearings. And on these bearings, sometimes the oil that was put in there at the factory, 30, 40, 50 years ago, might evaporate, dry up, whatever, and those bearings might seize. And if those bearings seize, it's not going to turn very easily. And that can stop the motor from actually running, from operating. Okay, now the other thing, right here on the top of each truck, there is this thing, the gear tower, and it has a helical gear in here that drives a series of gears that turns the wheels. Now again, there are 2 bearings in here, and the oil can evaporate or gum up, so that could be a problem. There could be grease on the gear itself that could gum up over the years. That can be a problem. So we'll take a look at that. Finally, I'm going to pop off the bottom here, the bottom plate, from these trucks, and we'll take a look at the gears, because the gears down in here that drive the wheels can gum up over time as well. So it's primarily a lubrication issue in most cases. Occasionally you might find broken gears or something like that, and I did a video on replacing the gears in these types of locomotives, and I'll put a link to that video here and also at the end of the video on the end page as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on the top here and see if it's something here in this gear tower. So these are fairly easy to remove. I just take a screwdriver and slide it under here, and you do have to be careful not to break it, of course, but if you just wedge it off, it'll pop right off of there. Okay, and this, let me zoom in a little bit more. This right here is that helical gear that I was talking about. So what I'm going to do is, now you can pull that out. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to pull that out of there. And you can see that, that gear, and these are the 2 bearings here, these little square pieces here. And I can't hardly turn it. So that's probably the problem right off, is that that bearing was totally gummed up. I'm going to take a toothbrush and clean this off. Okay. Now, depending on how gummed up these are, we might be able to get by with just oiling them and bringing it back to life that way. So I'm going to get out my oil, and this is, I think this is a Labelle oil, but it's, just any, standard light oil that is plastic compatible, and you can buy this at your hobby shop. Woodland Scenics makes a version of this, and so you can find this quite easily. So I'm going to put a little drop of oil right here on the shaft and on this little bearing. And then let's give it a turn and see, there it's freeing up already. I can turn it freely now. So that might have been the only problem that we had. I'm going to hold that in a pair of needle nose pliers, and we'll give that a spin or two and see if we can't get some lubrication in there. And it's turning freely now, as you can see. I'm going to clean that shaft off while I've got it exposed. Okay. Now it's turning freely. There, that's good. Now let's see what this one does. Okay, so they're both turning freely now. Now, got that all lubed up. I'm going to reinsert it here, and it just goes right here into the mechanism here, and then it pops right back down in here. But before we do that, let's go ahead. I'm going to take some of my HL 657 Hobby Lube white grease. Okay, now you can get this at hobby shops. You can order it, and this is a plastic compatible grease made for lubricating locomotives and other models, and it contains Teflon. So I'm just going to give it a little squirt down in here to lubricate the gears here. There we go. So you can see that, and I can freewheel this and get that grease distributed on the gear. Now I can just slide this back into place here in the universal joint, and we can work these bearings back into their slots here on the top of the gear tower. There. And then you just take this and pop it right back into place. There. And it's back together again. Now let's do the other end. It's good to have a couple of different sizes of screwdrivers because you might need them to pop this out of here. But be very careful doing this because you don't want to break these. You can get these, but you know, it takes a while to find them. Okay, so I've got that one exposed now. Let's pop it out. You can see the green corrosion on here. So that's a hint that, yep, same problem there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start doing some cleaning. Here I'm going to pull that bearing off and clean it, clean the shaft. And I'm going to pull this one forward on the shaft and give it a clean with a toothbrush too. There we go, and a spot of oil right there. And move the bearing back into place, give it a turn or two. And over here, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to hold these and spin them again. Get that grease, that oil lubrication on there. And there we go. That's nice and free now. So let's reinstall it. Now when you're doing this, look down in here and you can see the gears inside. And make sure that there's no gummed up other grease in there that has solidified over time. This one, it looks pretty good. There we go. So I've got it distributing some grease around, and it's back in place. Make sure it's in place on the bolster. And then I'm going to flip it around and reinstall it. Put it back into place in the universal. It's hard to see this because it's a black component going into a black component. And there. You have to turn these little square bearings surfaces so they fit down into a slot here in the top of the gear tower. And then once they get down in there, then you're in good shape. Okay, so we're going to put this back in place here. You can see the little flanges that hold the truck onto the bolster. You just pop that into place and hear it click, and everything's ready to run again. Let's see. That's moving a lot better already. Yes. So that's turning quite freely now. Okay, but that might not be the end of our problems. That probably was all it was those bearings were totally gummed up and froze. But what I want to do, though, is show you, just in case, let's flip it over and take a look at the gears inside of the truck itself. So this cover plate sits here on the bottom of the truck and prevents ballast and other things like that from getting up here and fouling your gears. Now you have to be careful, again, popping this off because, you know, it is possible to break this stuff, particularly after this long a period. But you just kind of slide it up under here. There's a clip mechanism that's holding things in place, and you just basically have to pop that off of there. And just so it won't go into a low Earth orbit, I tend to put my finger over it to protect it a bit. Okay, now I'm going to turn it around and work from the other side and try to pop it off from there. Now, sometimes something thin like an X-Acto knife blade will fit in here better. So you can just slide that up in there. So there is that cover plate. You can see that could get broken quite easily. So you have to be very careful with it. Okay, looking here, the gears are in very good shape. There's just a light coating of oil. There's no gunked up grease or anything in here. So I think these are okay. I don't see any problems here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to, while I've got it open though, I'm going to give a drop to each one of these bearings. And you'll see them. These are a bronze bearing. And they basically are a material called sintered bronze, which means that they take the bronze powder and compress it together to form these, in molds, to form these bearings. And because they're compressed together and not melted, they have little spaces in them, so they'll hold the oil and stay lubricated a long time. Okay, now let's go ahead, pop the bottom plate back on. It goes on much easier than it comes off, as you can see. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get things set back up, and we'll get the power back on and the test track set up and see if that's fixed it. I've set up my DCC Concepts rolling road here so that we can let this thing run for a little while. And as you can see, these are spread out so that they will fit with the Athearn trucks. So let me get that on the rolling road. And I'll put a link to the video that I did recently that showed how these rolling roads work. So now let's go ahead and see if the locomotive is going to operate. Okay, as you can see and hear, it's running fine now. So I can crank it on up and let it run a while. Let's reverse it. And as you can see, it's starting real smooth and running fairly well. Not bad for a locomotive that is probably 50 years old. So all it took was a few minutes to pull apart the drive mechanism, particularly the helical gear here, and get the oil cleaned up on these bearing surfaces here on this shaft and get these operating again. And once that was done, the locomotive was ready to run. Now I have also seen locomotives and pulled apart locomotives where the lubrication inside the trucks had actually gummed up as well. So you might need to do a little bit more. Fortunately, the drivetrain and the gears in this one were fine. So the main problem was the bearings and the shafts here on these helical gears that transmit power down to the trucks. Now, another thing that you might want to do while you've got your oil out is right here between the flywheel and the motor itself, you can see where the shaft comes out. Go ahead and apply just a little drop of oil right in that opening, and that will lubricate the motor bearings as well, because they can dry up over time and have the same type of problems as the bearings on the helical gears. So let's give this a try and get that lubrication distributed in there. So So you can see that's going to even operate at a fairly slow speed without any problems at all. And that's it. Now, anytime that you are getting ready to do a DCC conversion, go through this process first. You always want to make sure that your locomotive that you're going to convert to DCC runs well on DC. Because if you put a decoder in this, if I had put a decoder in this locomotive and put it on the track and started it up with that motor locked up due to the bearings seizing, that decoder would have smoked in no time because it would have stalled, and it would have stalled at a higher stall current probably than what that decoder could take because of this motor. And I'll put a link here to a video that I did on checking the stall currents of locomotives so that you'll know how to do that as well. You know, if you don't hear any humming and nothing works, then you probably have a bad motor and you'll probably need to replace it. But as long as the motor's humming and trying to turn the gears and trying to turn the flywheels, then it's probably a lubrication problem. So check there first and move on if necessary. I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to dig out some of your old trains or your father's old trains or even your grandfather's old train sets and get them running again, because, you know, they can be a lot of fun to play with, and you can actually get them working on your model railroad and use them for legacy power and just, you know, to add a little bit more flavor and color to your rolling stock and your fleet of locomotives. That's about it for this video. Have a good week, and we'll see you here on Friday with another video from the DCC guy. Bye now.